This video is about lathe basics, the basic parts of the lathe and setting it up and doing your first bit of turning between centres. Now this is a short bed lathe, other ones have a longer bed. The bed is this section basically between your centres. We have the headstock of the lathe, which is the section where all of the pulleys are. So this is where it's being driven with a motor that's down underneath. We've got the tailstock, which is what holds the dead centre, the live centres in the headstock. The bed section is the section where the tool rests will get attached. The tailstock is attached and clamped in place. This one also has a cutaway in the bed for doing larger turning of bowls when you're using a faceplate. But essentially this is set up for turning between centres for a small piece here. The spur centre goes in on this end, and the dead centre, which we have a revolving centre, goes into the tailstock. It's put into place by setting your piece up, making sure that your timber is in your grooves that you've cut out before, lining the centre up on your tailstock, making sure that the tailstock is actually clamped in place and it's not going to move, winding the tailstock handle in so that it's nice and firm, and that's going to be held in place, and then making sure that whether it's a lever or a locking nut, that this is tied in place and tight. That stops this part slowly moving outwards because of the vibration of the machine. Your tool rest for turning between centres needs to be set up so that the tool is going to be just above the centre of your timber, so that as it's coming around, it'll go past the cutting edge of the blade, and there's less likelihood of the tool being stuck in between the timber and the tool rest. Whether the tool rest has locking levers or locking nuts, you need to make sure that they're all nice and firm. So I've got my tool rest is nice and firmly held down to the bed. I've also got my tool rest here, so this is tool rest holder. The tool rest is firmly in place. I've got it so that my timber is going to clear the tool rest as it rotates around. That's an important thing that you need to check when you first set it up. If you don't and then you turn it on and it hits this, it could throw the timber off at you. Make sure that it's going to turn. You should check that the speed is suitable for the timber you're turning. Larger cog here is a very slow speed, smaller cog here is a very fast speed. I've got it on one of the mid ones, which is good for a small piece of timber. And before you start doing any turning, it's a good idea to turn it on and see that it goes well, that there's no vibration or anything like that. Stand to the side of the machine, so don't stand in front of the job as you're starting to turn this on. Hands clear. That's good. So I know that I'm ready to start turning. For the turning process, most of the time you start with what's known as a rough and gouge. It's one of the bigger chisels. It has a large cutting edge, and the basic idea is that you have it resting on here. You do what I call motorboating. You have it start to rub on the back of the bevel, so no tool, no cutting edge is coming into contact with the timber. You then start to raise up the back of your handle until the cutting edge comes into contact with the timber and it wants to start cutting. And then you move from one end to the other, slowly removing your timber. You don't want to try and take out too much in one place. I'll just demonstrate that first process. So, on the tool rest, letting the bevel rub, starting to bring it up until I get a bit of a cut, and just slowly move it along. Rubbing, bringing it up. Taking a little bit off just there. I'm actually going to check that chisel, make sure it's nice and sharp, or I'll try one of the other gouges. That one seems a bit better. So, starting it up, letting it rub, bringing it up until it comes in contact, then tilting it and moving along the timber. Do that in the opposite direction so you can see it a bit better. Up until I get a bit of a cut. Now, from the sound of that and by how high I had to lift that, I've got my tool rest just slightly too high. So I loosen that off. I still want to keep it so that my tool rest is at around centre, but my cutting tool is going to be just above centre. Now we'll see how that one goes. Still missing it. You'll notice this time my backhand, this one isn't quite as high, so I'm getting a much better cutting angle. And you're listening for that sort of a sound where it's a little bit smoother sounding. You no longer have that motorboating sound. Now if I check that and I look at that, apart from just here, I now have my timber down to round. So you're working at getting it down to round before you start doing any shaping, unless of course you are keeping some of your square sections in your job. But that's the basics of turning between centres, setting it up, holding the tool, starting with the main gouge and giving it a go.